There's a gift of Steve Buscemi that comes from a cutaway scene in the show 30 Rock.
I was part of a special task force of very young-looking cops who infiltrated high schools. How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
I see this meme a lot. I find it in the comment sections of sponsored posts and brands trying to insert themselves into a subculture where they don't belong. There's this psychological phenomenon known as the uncanny valley, where something that is human-like but not quite right creates a sense of eeriness or discomfort in the eye of the observer. I want you to take a look at these photos and see if you can feel it. The term was first coined by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori in 1970. He hypothesized that as robots or other human-like creations became more human-like in appearance, it causes an eerie, unsettling feeling. It's the same feeling I get when I open Instagram and see a product I was just thinking about on my feed. And it's my personal theory that it's the uncanny valley that triggers the emotional meme response of how do you do, fellow kids. In the late 1990s, Amazon introduced a feature that would revolutionize marketing, collaborative filtering. It looked at past interactions like which items were purchased or viewed together and used that data to make predictions about what the customer might like in the future. But that system was proprietary to Amazon and wasn't really helpful to the rest of us, and it would stay that way until Google introduced AdWords a few years later. This algorithm changed the game for marketers by serving targeted search ads based on users' search intent, location, and behavior. Google AdWords was a very blunt tool, limited by the relatively small amount of data that Google could capture on a user based on their search. And I think if people knew what was to come, they might have stayed on that cliffside of innovation, because in 2007, a new social media platform was released: Facebook. Users flocked to the site to surrender key data insights like age, relationship status, ethnicity, religious beliefs, political beliefs, location, and whatever was on their mind for that day. And when it finally came time for Facebook shareholders to make money, Facebook leveraged those key data insights to create its own personalized ad algorithm, allowing advertisers to reach users with X-Acto knife precision. From there, every platform introduced its own form of data mining to collect as much information on their users as possible, allowing marketers to buy front row seats to the eyeballs that would be most interested in their products. You and I are part of a generation whose privacy has been harvested to create a personal ad experience that would make Don Draper blush. And all this data that the internet has been collecting on us for the past 20 years has found a new home: large language models, aka AI. And the thing these models are best at is allowing people to take our data and reduce the speed of text, voice, and design generation down to nanoseconds. This all starts off as fun when DJ X on Spotify says my name before playing random music that I've never heard of in my life. But how am I going to feel when ads start doing the same thing and calling out my pain points that it harvested from my therapeutic conversations with ChatGPT? We're on the edge of another algorithmic catastrophe. And instead of steeping you in speculation on the horrors of data collection that will empower our future AI agents to make predictions for brands based on what consumers like, I want to talk about something different, because we've been here before. The early 1980s was an era marked by the rise of consumerism, with Ronald Reagan at the center, reshaping policies that emphasize free market capitalism.
The next 60 seconds are for men and women who want to succeed in business.
His presidency would see the reduction of government regulations, tax cuts aimed at businesses designed to reward them for making more money, and negotiations of free trade agreements that promoted global markets. The free market ideals of Reagan's policies unleashed a wave of aggressive business strategies as companies fought for dominance in an environment where competition was now unleashed and unchecked. And nowhere was this competition more cutthroat than between Pepsi and Coke. Coca-Cola was introduced to the world by John Stith Pemberton, a pharmacist in Atlanta, Georgia, who created the original formula for Coca-Cola in 1886. Pemberton's drink was sold as a medicinal tonic that could cure various ailments, including headaches and fatigue. However, Dr. Pemberton never realized the potential of the beverage he created. In 1888, he passed away, with his shares of Coca-Cola going to Asa G. Candler. Candler proceeded to buy the additional rights and acquire complete control of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola worked quickly to establish dominance. Their first stroke of marketing innovation, the introduction of the coupon system. That's right, Coca-Cola is credited for creating the coupon. By offering a free glass of Coca-Cola, the company was able to generate massive public interest and brand recognition. Coca-Cola was growing stronger each day, but as Vision says in Captain America: Civil War,
our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict.
In 1898, Pepsi came onto the scene. Pepsi was founded by Caleb Bradham and originally marketed as a drink that could aid digestion and boost energy. Pepsi's early success came from underpricing Coca-Cola, offering larger servings for less money. The two companies would almost instantly become dominant national players, with Coca-Cola being number one and Pepsi being a close second. And by the 1940s, Pepsi was looking for a way to push out the competition, which made them realize that Coca-Cola had long ignored the black community in America. Pepsi hired an all-black sales team and began targeting black Americans with more inclusive marketing and advertising, including some of the earliest examples of black models and aspirational portrayals of black families in advertising. It took the 1960s civil rights movement for Coca-Cola to realize the importance of diversity in both their advertising and their customer base. But the groundwork by Pepsi had already been laid. By being countercultural when there was a greater risk of being canceled by their racist customers, Pepsi had established a foundation of cultural relevance and social awareness. The era of the 40s and 50s promoted a culture of consumerism, where success was measured by how much one could acquire. As the children of this era of consumerism turned into teenagers and young adults, they brought rebellion against traditional societal norms and authority. They became increasingly disillusioned by consumerism, and as the next generation often does, they sought their own form of individuality by rejecting a consumer-driven culture. They saw it as shallow, unsatisfying, limiting, and the leaders of the civil rights progress of the 1960s had awakened them to the reality that the American dream was empty and didn't address the deeper needs of personal fulfillment, cultural expression, or social justice. This led them to look for brands that weren't just selling to build the economy, rather aligned with their values. Welcome, my friends, to the Pepsi generation.
Across the nation, it's the Pepsi generation. Here today, here to stay, we are free.
Coca-Cola had made their bed with advertisements that featured Norman Rockwell-styled images of small town and nostalgic scenes and traditional figures such as Santa Claus. They had catered to white America and in doing so had alienated minority groups, the same ones Pepsi had been targeting for 2 decades. Pepsi had been in the shadow of Coca-Cola for years, waiting for this moment, and as Coca-Cola was about to learn, mainstream society eventually surrenders to the fringes. Have you ever looked at portraits of US presidents? In 1789, we see George Washington was clean-shaven with a ponytail. By the time the next generation takes office, Abraham Lincoln was short-haired with a beard. Popularity and trends fade when they succumb to the next generation's attempts at independence. By aligning itself with the fringes of society, Pepsi was playing the long game and was finally getting its shot at being number one, and they did not miss. Pepsi adopted an aggressive stance, investing heavily in advertising with celebrity endorsements like Michael Jackson and Madonna. In 1975, they finally put the Coca-Cola Company on defense by asking customers in a blind taste test which they prefer, Pepsi or Coke. This became known as the Pepsi Challenge, with most people in the commercial choosing Pepsi over Coca-Cola. And while some have speculated that it was rigged, according to David Grissom, the author of I'd Like to Buy the World of Coke, the Pepsi Challenge wasn't just a marketing gimmick, it was true. The Pepsi Challenge highlighted the taste difference between the two sodas and positioned Pepsi as the cooler, youthful, and rebel brand, further distancing themselves from the more traditional, old-fashioned image of Coca-Cola. After years of waiting in the wings, Pepsi became number one in 1980, pushing Coca-Cola's market share in the US to number 2. But Coca-Cola was not ready to go quietly into that good night. Internally, they were scrambling to find a way to retake the limelight. Internal research teams, along with Burke Incorporated, started conducting in-depth market research that surpassed anything Coca-Cola had done before. Ultimately, Coca-Cola was developing a prediction model that would decide the next trend and artificially accelerate their brand's reputation among young people, something that Pepsi had accomplished organically by just aligning themselves with the needs of society. And what did this spectacular artificial intelligence prompt Coca-Cola to do? Change the formula. On April 23rd, 1985, the Coca-Cola chairman and CEO stepped before the press gathered at New York City's Lincoln Center to introduce the new formula, which he declared to be smoother, rounder, yet bolder. And while executives were trying to highlight boldness for the new flavor profile, the press was stating the obvious. New Coke tasted sweeter and more like Pepsi. Some may choose to call this the boldest single marketing move in the history of the packaged goods business. We simply call it the surest move ever made. They dressed up Coca-Cola with a sweatshirt, a backwards baseball cap, carrying a skateboard, and walked up to the next generation with a "How do you do, fellow kids?"
The diehards say the old Coke was the real thing. New Coke a mere imposter, and they won't swallow it.
Would you like to sign a petition, get back the old Coke?
Karen
The
Wilson's
change was
diehard.
perceived as a betrayal, leading to widespread protests and complaints from Coca-Cola customers. On the New York Stock Exchange, shares of Coca-Cola dropped, while those of its rival rose. Pepsi gave its employees the day off and declared victory in a full-page newspaper advertisement that boasted, "After 87 years of going eyeball to eyeball, the other guy just blinked." Pepsi also celebrated Coke's downfall with ads like this.
What's the matter, Wilbur?
They changed my Coke.
Something wrong with it?
I know, they sure changed it.
Coulda asked.
What coulda? I stuck with them through 3 wars and a couple of dust storms, but this is too much. Guess something big made them change.
Right, big.
Right big. Pepsi, the choice of a new generation.
Still could have asked.
Now, key observers here might notice that Pepsi is using the tagline Pepsi, the voice of a new generation, and you might think that that's a stab at New Coke. However, Pepsi was using that tagline in 1984 when it dropped its Michael Jackson collab, a year before the launch of New Coke, which means that the new in New Coke might also have been lifted from Pepsi. Coca-Cola received 40,000 calls and letters expressing anger or disappointment. Some individuals even hoarded the original product, fearing it might be permanently discontinued. This outrage shocked Coca-Cola executives. According to their datasets from 1982, they had surveyed 2,000 people in 10 major cities to see how they would react to a new Coke formula. Participants viewed mock ads and answered questions about whether they would try, switch to, or be upset about the change. Results showed that only 10 to 12% of Coke drinkers would be unhappy. New Coke's launch was backed by data, with over 200,000 blind taste tests conducted, millions of dollars spent in research, and 3 years of product development. It took 82 years for Coca-Cola to change the original formula to New Coke, but only 79 days for them to change it back.
The simple fact is that all of the time and money and skill poured into consumer research on the new Coca-Cola could not measure or reveal the depth and abiding emotional attachment to original Coca-Cola felt by so many people.
Coca-Cola executives were hoping for a big win with New Coke, something that would push Pepsi out of the #1 slot. Their data had predicted that changing the formula was the right move. But what it failed to predict was the emotional response people would have with the change. In his announcement that Coca-Cola would be reintroducing the original formula, Keogh said, "Our boss is the consumer. We want them to know we are really sorry." Surprisingly, after upsetting its customer base with the change, this little act of humanity is what caused people to reconnect with the Coca-Cola brand, which triggered a rise in sales, bringing Coca-Cola back to the #1 slot in market share. The very essence of data seeks to do what we all want to do: understand the human experience. But where I see data fail time and time again is whenever it tries to predict what's next for the human experience. Psychologist Jack Barham theorized the psychological reactance theory, which explains how individuals will often act in opposite to perceived threats to their freedom or autonomy. When people feel their choices or behaviors are being predicted or controlled, they will rebel to regain their sense of independence. Marketing that is based on an entirely predictive model that knows you better than you know yourself will result in the reaction of rebellion. People might even reject a product that they love because it feels invasive, impersonal, and overly controlling. This is how countercultural trends start. People feel boxed in by predictability, and so they rebel to try and regain their sense of autonomy. These movements thrive on rejecting the norm, embracing unpredictability, and even celebrating the chaos that comes from not conforming. There's a quote that's often attributed to Henry Ford that says, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses." It's thrown around in marketing books as a way that we should think about product development, that we should throw out data and only give people what they dreamed they could never have. However, that's not how innovation works. Primitive man didn't invent the wheel because they wanted to rebel against carrying things over long distances. They invented the wheel because they saw a need for faster transportation. And there's actually no definitive evidence that Henry Ford ever said that quote, but he did say this: "If there's one secret to success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own." Where Coca-Cola failed wasn't its use of data. It was the choice to side with data while ignoring what was happening with culture and underestimating the emotional response its customers had to its original formula. They had sat on the sidelines of major cultural changes, only stepping on the field when its data told them it was safe. Then, when their image was being greatly ignored, they tried to enlist data to predict how they could fix it. Meanwhile, Pepsi had aligned itself with what was happening in the world. They had been a representative of culture and had earned their tagline, "A voice of a generation." What we have to understand as innovators, marketers, and creators is that data can only tell us how the world is. Only human connection, relationships, and consistent involvement with the people we create for can tell us how the world will be. We must dedicate ourselves to choosing people over data. If not, we risk over-relying on AI that only asks one question: how do you do, fellow kids?